The disgraced Stuart Nash, former Member of Parliament for New Zealand Labour, who was forced to resign his portfolios after repeated breaches of the Cabinet Manual and official information laws, was at one time the Economic and Regional Development Minister of the nation. During his tenure, he talked up how retention of the production here in New Zealand, or Aotearoa, for Amazon's The Rings of Power will, and I quote, bring in jobs and increase spending. Subsequently, Amazon decided to leave this country, long suffering from an identity crisis for the UK. Naturally, Mr. Nash caught a lot of flack for his failure to retain the series. While these recent governments have achieved little, other than to drive up inflation, mandate the Pfizer vaccine creating two distinct classes of people...
If you are vaccinated...
That is what it is, so, yep.
Further, a Māori-tribalist agenda with a reimagined interpretation of the Treaty of Waitangi that achieves a co-governance model where people, based on the colour and race of their ancestors, receive medicinal priority and greater voting rights, banned oil and gas exploration only to import an additional 1.5 million tonnes of coal since coming into office, and then there's the infamous attempt at introducing hate speech reforms that pose a significant risk to free speech and democracy. Despite all these, and many more, Nashy Boy might have been onto something with Rings of Power. Did he foresee that the Rings of Power would flop so badly, New Zealand needed to distance itself from the event and to share in the blame, and its global brand and reputation would suffer? Did we lose the production on purpose? It must come as quite a shock, but at least here, our name-translated Galadriel is still swimming. Returning to the Harfoots, Nori and Poppy approach this mysterious celestial. Because Nori is a plucky and curious character, as we were told over again in the prior episode, you know Nori. Do I know Nori? Do you know Nori? As the Harfoots are kind-natured folk where nobody walks alone, she rescues Not Gandalf, lumping him in the cart. Poppy protests he might be dangerous and can't understand why Nori is so persistent to help this Not Gandalf or Sauron red herring. Do you know Sauron? Have you heard of Sauron? Of course, and rather than out of common decency does she help this Not Gandalf. Nori seeks to explain how she feels it's her responsibility. You see, this is her story, and she justifies this sudden sense of self-importance by saying, I was supposed to find him. Me. I can't walk away from that. Does this sound remotely familiar? This reminds of another character who was actually meant to carry of some notable burden, some significant responsibility. But whenever he talks about the ring as my task and mine alone, Frodo is under the influence of the ring's evil. The ring is making him a self-righteous and narcissistic personality who spouts of his own self-importance. I'm left asking why Nori feels this way. Why would the writers inadvertently take away her agency? Because she's special and member berries?
Remember Ghostbusters?
It is all I've got. Or that this is just another example of lazy writing seeking to draw parallels to far superior works. Sorry, a tad early to draw that conclusion, but the writing so far is really trying my patience. I mean, would it not make her character more endearing if she just helped this Not Gandalf out of her own goodwill? About it simply being the right thing to do rather than seek to artificially empower a character only recently introduced, but I digress. Back to the Southlands. Arindir and Bronwyn discover the village of Hordern has been razed to the ground. They soon discover that a passage has been dug beneath the village, and Arindir resolves to go alone and investigate. Why he doesn't go with Bronwyn to warn the villagers, to seek aid from those elves that remain at the watchtower prior to their departure? Well, because the plot demands it. Once more, and as the title card prompts, we leap somewhere else in this version of Middle-earth, this time Eregion, where we have young Ned Stark converse with Celebrimbor about the Silmarils and of the intent to construct a great forge that their like is never before realised. Young Ned Stark suggests that they reach out to the dwarves of Khazad-dum. Then, and having travelled a fair way, given the map's illustration, and with Celebrimbor proclaiming his excitement to see Khazad-dum and meet with the dwarves deny them entry until young Ned Stark issued the right of Sigyn Tarag. Celebrimbor is promptly abandoned outside the entrance. I half expected a cutaway to Celebrimbor as he slowly marched back to Eregion to be singing 100 mugs of mead on the wall, 100 mugs of mead. Take one down, pass it around. You catch my drift. Anyway, once inside Khazad-dum, we finally have a setting that begins to suggest the effort and craftsmanship that such a hefty budget would demand. While I feel it's somewhat lax when comparing to the grandiose scope and scale of Jackson's original trilogy's great halls, the aesthetic here does not disappoint. It does feel like a world inhabited, and it does lead to a strong introduction to the dwarves with a decent accompanying procession in service of Prince Durin, played by Owain Arthur, and this rite of Sigyn Tarag. What is this rite of Sigyn Tarag? That I likely continue to butcher in my delivery? Well, rock breaking, of course. Returning to Nori and the Harfoots, we receive a scene of breaking down language barriers with Not Gandalf, and that reminds of other productions where this setup was done better.
It's a big good. Big good.
Still, and while I hate the bastardization of Gandalf here on its own merits, Nori has come across as somewhat likeable to this point. Hey, with the general unpleasant characterization of Alicia, we must take what we can get. Unfortunately for Nori, and with her not present to assist her father, Largo Brandyfoot, played by Dylan Smith, he has a misstep and ends up severely damaging his ankle. Lenny Henry asks Nori how bad the injury is and whether he can migrate, but I don't think Nori should worry. Given the close-knit community and that nobody walks alone mantra, Nori and her family should be fine. Back at sea, and I kid you not, Alicia continues her swim before fortuitously encountering the remnants of a shipwreck and a small number of survivors. This is some serious Deus Ex Machina. There is plot convenience and then there is plot contrivance. I mean, how else can we recover our main character when we dished her thousands of miles out at sea? How did the showrunners let this lazy storytelling get through the vetting process and past a team of editors? The survivors briefly debate whether they should aid Alicia and share their limited rations, having fallen under attack by a giant sea creature. Reluctant to tell a stranger too much, the lady asks the cynical older white male, "Does she look dangerous to you?" And then a younger man that resembles a bargain bin Aragorn, played by Charlie Vickers, says, "Looks can be deceiving." Of course, it could just be a red herring. I'm sure that not Gandalf is actually Sauron. Do you know Sauron? Have you heard of Sauron? The one lady that wished to help her then performs a 180 upon learning Alicia is an elf. Do all humans just hate elves? It somewhat made sense, even if it was a sloppy allegorical effort, that the Southlanders resented the elves as the defeated allies of Morgoth. But here, who are these people? The lady calls Alicia a liar, despite she had said or concealed nothing from them. I'm getting mighty sick of the nonsensical writing. Reminds of a poorly translated foreign film. The worm then returns, dragging the remnants of their old ship, and the worm then disposes of the survivors. With only the Aragorn clone escaping and Alicia again overboard, the worm returns to finish them off. No, never mind. It would appear the worm has eaten enough or has a sore stomach from eating too much. Not only did this plot contrivance result in the rescue of the show's main protagonist, but this also serves to achieve the imminent shipping of Alicia and another prominent character who I'm certain isn't Sauron. This mysterious figure, introducing himself as Halbrand, rescues Alicia and provides her with water. Does she thank him? Is there any offer of gratitude and character development other than the exchange of names? Back to rock breaking, and where young Ned Stark forfeits, with the consequence being his banishment. Prince Durin accompanies young Ned Stark to the exit, where young Ned Stark learns that 20 years have passed since they last saw one another. Prince Durin believes that young Ned Stark has taken his friendship for granted, and the only reason he has returned is in pursuit of something Prince Durin can provide him. Through these 20 years, young Ned Stark had missed Prince Durin's wedding and the birth of his children. Young Ned Stark, recognizing he's deeply hurt Prince Durin, hopes he can one day forgive him. I cannot begin to explain how this differs from the previous episode and a half. I believe both actors did a fine job in conveying the regret over their estranged friendship, and it explores the differences between dwarves and elves, mortals and immortals, in a relatively satisfying way that adds, rather than detracts, from the world building. In The Lord of the Rings, we see a dwarf and Gimli develop a friendship with an elf and Legolas. And despite the bitter resentment expressed for one another upon first meeting at the Council of Elrond, here, and between these two races, we have the challenge of reconciliation over a friendship perceived as being taken for granted, and the acknowledgement by the other having failed to recognize the importance where time for one race is finite. I was also pleasantly surprised that the actress Sophia Namvetti, who'd constantly championed being the first female dwarf we've ever seen, was actually not half bad as this energetic, caring and enthusiastic Princess Disa, who seeks to mediate the rift between her husband, Prince Durin, and young Ned Stark here. Despite some of the cheesiness, I really enjoyed these scenes, and it made me consider that perhaps I'd become too harsh on this production. And then we return to Halbrand and Alicia adrift at sea. "I'm simply wondering what manner of man would so readily abandon his companions to death," she asks him. "I'm sorry, what? You didn't appear to do anything either, considering you are the supposed great commander of the northern armies, warrior of the wastelands, and presumed admiral of the seas. Also, what the heck was he supposed to do? Why are you just so unpleasant to and with everyone you encounter?" Oh, and Halbrand informs Alicia it was not elves but orcs that chased him from his homeland, with an obligatory cutaway to the Eye of Sauron stand-in. Alicia asks about his necklace, like Eowyn asking Aragorn about his and Jackson's trilogy. She then interrogates Halbrand like any disgruntled Karen would when speaking to the manager. In fact, should I from here on refer to Alicia as simply Karen?
I want in your water park right now! The park's closed. They're filming a commercial. I want to speak to your manager!
Here, and I quote, as Karen lectures this relative stranger, "I need to know how many the enemy were, under whose banner they marched, and then you are going to take me to their last known location." Bear in mind, this Halbrand shows no interest in this Karen's desire for revenge, nor does he want her help. If it weren't so obvious that Halbrand is intended to be Sauron, you could make a case that Karen here would be a suitable contender. I'm still searching for a single redeeming quality. We then shift to the Southlands narrative. Bronwyn returns to report her findings in relation to the village of Hordern and its demise. But Waldrick here and the others won't hear any of it. Meanwhile, her son Theo loses his mind with all these mises in the floorboards and spots the milk-white eye of an orc. Bronwyn returns, and the orc surfaces from the tunnel beneath their home, and a fight scene ensues more resembling The Walking Dead. Are these lesser evolved orcs? They just pale in comparison to the orcs of Jackson's trilogy. And I'm not talking about the Uruk-hai. How could something made in 2022 and with a budget of 460 plus million visually fall so far short of a production in the making over 20 years ago? Eventually, and while this idiotic orcish creature turns its back to her, Bronwyn beheads the rubbery-looking creature and presents it before Waldrick and the others. Well, now they must believe her, right? How dare they discard her concerns earlier? If she weren't only a mere woman, Waldrick and the others would have treated her with some respect. Hurrah! Their new queen is here! She hath arrived! Back to the raft, the weather takes a nasty turn and Karen falls overboard. Fortunately, and somewhat surprisingly, Halbrand saves her. But don't worry, folks, Karen hasn't lost her agency. While Halbrand may appear a man, as a Maya, he is many things. Back with the Harfoots, like Gandalf speaking to the moth atop Isengard, not Gandalf speaks with fireflies and has them form a constellation. Nori recognizes this is how they help him. He wants us to help him find those stars, she says. One of the fireflies dies, and then all the other lights dim. You know, he could be Gandalf, he could be Sauron, or he could be E.T. I'm leaning toward the latter. With Prince Durin and King Durin, we get yet another mystery box, being Mithril. Before we then return to Bronwyn's son holding the prior mystery box being the dagger from episode 1. Arindir is captured by orcs, and lastly, a ship pulls up alongside Karen's raft. So, was episode 2 better than 1? I would answer yes. I liked the segments featuring young Ned Stark, Prince Durin, and Queen Disa, and young Ned Stark's adventures in Khazad-dum. While I wouldn't call it scintillating television, there's at least something to praise, even if it's modest at best. Sadly, and for me, all the Harfoot scenes achieve is to elicit my apathy, but they aren't actively unpleasant like a certain imposter. So far, and including the Southlands, the world building and narrative are both flat and boring. At this point, I consider it a chore to persist. And have I mentioned that the lead character is utterly insufferable? I struggle to recollect another protagonist of a major high-budget work that is less likeable or bereft of even the most minute semblance of charisma and charm. But yes, episode 2 presents a slight improvement. Maybe this is a slow burn where things only get better from here. But alas, hopium can be a strong drug.